Alright, so let's get started installing Terrastories. So the first thing we want to do is to have two windows open. A file explorer, which is open to the directory where you unzipped Terrastories, and a terminal window. Now, there are lots of choices in terminals depending on your operating system, but I'm giving this demo on Windows, and so I'm using a terminal that comes bundled with Windows called PowerShell. Now, the first thing we want to do is to take this file called .env.example and rename it to just .env, like so. Terrastories won't run unless you do that. Once you've renamed the file, let's open it up in a text editor like Notepad++. Now, you will want to have your Mapbox Studio access token copied and ready to paste in. And we're going to put it into this fifth line here, right where it says your PK token here. So go ahead and paste that in, save the file, and close it. Alright, now let's switch over to the terminal window, where I first have to navigate to the same directory that Terrastories is located in. So I'm going to switch to my D drive there, and go into the Terrastories directory, and now I can type ls to see that the content is exactly the same as in File Explorer. And now I'm going to run a command called docker compose build. Now, what docker compose build is going to do is download a whole bunch of dependencies that Terrastories requires in order to run. So this is a long process and it may take a while depending on the speed of your internet connection. So what I'm going to do here is just let this run. I'm going to fast forward quite a bit until we get to the next step. But I'll show you what that looks like once you finish installing all the dependencies. Alright, and that's done. Now, you will know that this installation process was successful if you see these messages at the end that say successfully built, successfully tagged Terrastories latest. If you see that, that's a good thing. Next, we're going to run another command, which is docker compose up. Now, this is actually the command that we will be using to start Terrastories every time, but the first time that you run it, it once again has to install a few dependencies, and there's an additional step that we have to do, which I will show you after these dependencies run. Alright, once that's done, you should see that this final line reads Control-C to stop. That's actually what you'll always see when you start Terrastories after this installation process, and you can in fact press Control-C here in the terminal to stop Terrastories. But for this first time installing, we have to run through one final step. Now, the first thing we have to do is pull up a second terminal window without closing the first one. This is very important. If you close the first window, this next step won't work. So on Windows, you can shift-click on the PowerShell icon to open another terminal window. So I'm going to do that and bring that into my screen here, and once again navigate to my Terrastories directory. Now we're going to run a command that reads docker compose exec web bin/setup. Check out the tutorial files for the exact spelling, or just to copy and paste it. Once you run that, it should go through a process of setting up a database for Terrastories, and that should be a lot quicker than the previous two processes. Okay, so maybe it still takes a little bit of time. Once that finishes, you should see this message, restarting application server, in the second window. And that means that you're done and you're now free to close this window. We are now complete with installing Terrastories. You can open up a browser window such as Chrome, Firefox, Safari, or Edge, and navigate to localhost 3000. That is the local server URL for Terrastories that is installed on your local computer. This will take a little while to spin up at first, and it really depends on how many resources you've allocated to Docker, but after a while, you should see our lovely Terrastories welcome screen come up. And that means that you've successfully installed Terrastories. Congratulations! From here on out, all you need to do is run docker compose up in the Terrastories directory to start the application.